Hey guys, this is Daniel from PB Prep, and today I'll be doing a literary analysis of a very popular poem. The poem is The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, and the purpose of this video isn't necessarily to provide you guys with some sort of profound meaning of what this poem actually means, because this poem has been around for quite some time, is really popular, and has been analyzed to oblivion. The purpose of this video is to provide an example of what it means to do a literary analysis, how I interact with the text, how one might derive meaning, and how to support that meaning using examples from the text, right? Because when you're making an argument, when you're making a claim about a piece of literature, it's important that you are able to support that argument using examples and evidence from the text and not making just empty claims, right? So let's get to it. A brief rundown of this video. I'll be reading the poem in full, as well as going over some brief formal elements of this poem, mostly just how it's divided and the rhyme scheme. And moving on from there, I'll be going over each of the stanzas one by one, line by line, and interacting with each line and trying to derive some meaning from them. So let's begin with the poem. So it's The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Line 1. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So that's the poem. Now let's go over some formal elements. So the poem is broken up into 4 sections, right? Now in a poem, a paragraph, if you will, is also known as a stanza. So this poem is broken up into 4 stanzas, and each stanza consists of 5 lines, right? And each stanza has a uniform rhyme scheme. So if we take a look at the end words of the first stanza, right? The first end word is wood, right? So I'm going to mark that with yellow. And then the second line ends with both. So I'm going to mark that with this green here, right? They're both different words. They both don't rhyme. But the third line ends with stood, which rhymes with wood. So I'm going to go back to this yellow. Same with the fourth line, could, stood, would, they all rhyme. And then the last line of the first stanza ends with undergrowth. Undergrowth rhymes with both. So I will mark them with the same color, right? And so we have this A, B, A, B type of rhyming pattern. That's true for all the other stanzas. And so let's take a quick look at that. Fair, I'll mark in this bluish color. Claim, this purplish color. And then where, there. So that rhymes with fair, where, there. And then same rhymes with claim. So I'm going to mark it like that. And then for the third stanza, so we have lay, black. So let's see, let's use orange. Lay. And then black. Let's use this other green. Hopefully there's a distinction. Yes, there is. So lay, black. Day rhymes with lay, and way also rhymes as well. So I'm going to call it on the same way. And then black rhymes with back. So we're going to have those two together. Again, the same rhyming pattern. And then the last stanza, it's no different. We'll start. Let's do red here. With sigh. And then hence. Let's do this darker purple. And then I and by, they all rhyme. So I and by, and then difference, hence it's close enough to be considered a rhyme. And there we have it, that A-A-B rhyming pattern is true for all four of these sections or stanzas, right? So now with that out of the way, let's take a look at each of these stanzas one by one, starting with stanza 1, right? It says here, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, right? Let's stop there. What does this line mean? Well, this line pretty much just tells us what the speaker's up to, right? So line 1 describes the setting, right? Presents a dilemma. So the speaker is at a fork in the road. So speaker is at a fork in the road. On to line 2 and 3. And sorry, I could not travel both and be one traveler, right? So let's stop and ask ourselves what that could mean, right? The speaker feels sorry, right? It says that, sorry, I could not travel both and be one traveler. So the speaker is experiencing some sort of uncertainty, right? The speaker wants to travel both, but the speaker understands that it's impossible to do so, right? I can't travel one path. I can't travel one path and the other path and be the same person. In order to experience both, you would have to be two travelers, right? And so in lines 2 and 3, the speaker feels uncertain as to which path to take, right? Like that's safe to say, because the speaker is feeling sorry that both paths cannot be taken at the same time. So what does the speaker do? How does the speaker react to this problem, right? So the speaker says, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So the speaker in lines 3 to 5, speaker looks down one path, right? Let's call this path 1, and describes what it looks like, right? Look down one path as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So the path bends, and the path is a bit overgrown, right? So what about path 1? So path 1 is windy, has bends, and it's overgrown. Path 1 like that is overgrown, right? Stanza 1 kind of presents the dilemma, presents the issue that the speaker is having. Speaker is encountering two separate paths, not sure about which one to take, wishes that they can take both paths, realizes that they cannot, right? So let's actually add that there. Searching as to which path to take, and recognizes that they can only take one. And so the speaker tries to scout out which path to go to. So it looks down path 1, realizes that it's windy and that it's overgrown, right? So let's move on to stanza number 2. So stanza number 2 begins with, then took the other as just as fair, right? So here in line 6, so let's do that and that. In line 6, speaker takes the other path. So the speaker takes the other path, right? And says that that path is just as fair. So it takes the other path, and that is path 2. Right? And says that path 2 is just as fair. So I'm using that as a quote, just as fair. Meaning there's no discernible difference between path 1 and path 2, right? The speaker says that I took path 2 and that path 2 is just as good as path 1. There's nothing that tells me that I shouldn't take the other one, right? But in line 7, right, let's read on. The speaker says, "In having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear," right? Well, the speaker just said that both paths are just as fair, just as the same. They're the same. Um, but the speaker is giving a reason as to why they took path number 2, right? And the reason is, so 7, speaker gives a reason for taking path 2, right? And that reason is because it was grassy, and wanted wear. Because it was grassy and wanted wear, right? Now, I want to highlight an important word here. So this is actually line 7, 8. I want to highlight this word perhaps, having perhaps the better claim. So the speaker took path 2, and for the reason, the speaker says, perhaps I took it because it was grassy and it wasn't as worn out, right? But the speaker used the word perhaps, right? And that's important because it still means that the speaker is still uncertain, right? So let's harp on that, perhaps, right? The speaker is still uncertain, right? The speaker isn't completely sold on taking, on the reason why they took path number 2, right? And perhaps it was this way. That's why I took it. So let's continue, right? Past line 8 to line number 9. Though, as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. So the speaker again recognizes in line number 9 and 10 that, in fact, both paths are equally worn out. Right? There's nothing distinguishing one path from the other. They're both essentially, as far as the speaker is concerned, the same decision, right? But when you're presented with choice A or choice B, and there's no external force to drive you to making a choice, how do you, or how did the speaker make a decision, right? When there's nothing pushing the speaker to make a decision, how does the speaker go about making, actually making and committing to a decision? Well, and these are some of the questions that I'm keeping in the back of my head with hopes that as I continue reading the rest of the poem, right, as I move on to stanza number 3, the hope is that some of these questions might be answered, right? So as far as the questions go, how do I make a decision when presented with equal decisions, equal choices, excuse me. So moving on to line 11, it says, "And both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black," right? Again, the speaker is hammering that point down in lines 11 and 12, right? That both paths are equal. And then in quotes, equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black, right? So they're both overgrown, they're both covered in leaves, they're both equally worn out, right? There's, again, no distinguishing features that differentiates path 1 from path 2, right? So let's move on to line 13. "Oh, I kept the first for another day," right? So the speaker in line 13, at line 13, the speaker still wants to take path 1, first for another day. Right? I'm going to come back to this. Right? So what does that mean about the speaker? The speaker, at least for me, it tells me that the speaker still certain about, about the decision. The speaker did take path 2, but is still thinking about taking path 1, right? So how does the speaker deal with that issue? Well, let's take a look at line 14 and line 15. Knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back, right? So line 14 pretty much says, well, since I know that if I make one choice, that's going to lead to another choice, which leads to another choice, right? I'm just going to keep going down this road, and I don't know if I'm ever going to come back to where I am to right now, right? So the speaker understands that a choice has to be made. A choice has to be made. And at the same time, the speaker understands that once a choice is made, there is no going back. So the speaker understands that um, when you're presented with the decision, once you make a decision, it's highly unlikely that you can go back and remake that same decision, right? Once you make a choice, there's no going back. He says, I doubted if I should ever come back, right? So he's saying that once I pick one, that's it. So how does the speaker feel about this? The speaker was presented with a dilemma, right? Let's go back actually to stanza 1. Presented with a dilemma, fork in the road from line 1. And from lines 2 and 3, the speaker feels uncertain as to which path to take and recognizes that only one path can be taken, right? Sorry, I could not travel both and be one traveler, right? I can only travel one and be one traveler. And so the speaker looks at one and describes how it looks, right? Path 1 is windy, path 1 is overgrown, and decides to take the other, right? I picked path 2, even though both paths are just as fair. And the reason why I picked path 2 is because maybe it was more grassy. Maybe it wasn't as worn out, right? And that maybe is because the speaker says perhaps the better claim, right? He's making a claim, right? He's not. It's not necessarily like airtight. Making an assumption. Perhaps it's more grassy, and perhaps it wasn't as worn out. But as the speaker goes ahead and takes that path, the speaker realizes that though as for that, the passing there, line 9, had warned them really about the same. So um, he kind of circles back and contradicts himself, saying that, oh yeah, path 2 is more grassy, but actually, no, it's not. They're both the same. And so lines 11 and 12 also kind of reaffirm that idea that both paths are equal to each other, right? It says, and both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. So both paths are equal, right? And they're both covered in leaves, and untouched leaves. Both covered in untouched leaves. And then line 13, the speaker still wants to take path 1, right? Oh, I kept the first for another day, which shows that the speaker is still hesitant about the decision to take path 2. And then lines 14 and 15, yet knowing how way leads to way, I doubted if I should ever come back, right? The speaker understands that once a choice has been made, that's it. You can't go back, right? And so at the end of this poem, the final stanza, the speaker says this, I shall be telling this with a sigh, right? That sigh is really, really important here. Telling this with a sigh. That sigh tells me as the reader that, excuse me, there it is, okay. Tells me as a reader that the speaker has feelings of resignation. So that's that word sigh. The speaker has feelings of resignation or the reluctant acceptance of the choices being made. Right? I should be telling this with a sigh. He's somewhat still unsatisfied. Right? Line 17. Somewhere in ages hence, two roads diverged in wood, and I took the one less traveled by. So 16 to 19, talking about the reason behind the choice that was made, the reason behind why path 2 was chosen, right? And the reason is this. And so I'm just going to extend it 16 to 19. Path 2 was chosen because it was the road was the one less traveled by. I'm going to use that as a quote. Right? Because it was the one less traveled by. Now, I want to pay attention to this highlighted section here. Right? Let me go ahead and highlight that in yellow. Right? He summarizes what happened to him, or to them, and says, two roads divergent would presented the issue again. And right, that long dash, right, this I with the long dash afterward, kind of signals that there's still a bit of hesitation, that resignation that I was talking about. You know, he says it with the sigh. He talks about why path 2 was taking, and hesitates. Two roads divergent wood, and dang it, I took the one less traveled by. So took the one less traveled by. But if we were to look at how the speaker was describing the two paths throughout the rest of the poem, going back to stanza 1, they're both equal, right? Stanza 2 talks about they're just as fair. Stanza 3, they both equally lay, right? So there's nothing that distinguishes path 1 from path 2, right? Stanza 2 even says that they're both worn out the same way, right? There's nothing that changes, but there's no difference between the two of them, right? And so why is it now that the speaker creates a difference? Or why is there now that that there is a difference to the speaker, right? What's the rationale behind this? And so if you were to look at that difference in line 20, what that means is, given all the factual evidence, right, as given by the speaker in stanzas 1, 2, and 3 about how equal these paths are, the definitive feature that ultimately caused the speaker to choose path 2 over path 1 in this case was because it was what he perceived to be the one less traveled by. So the speaker created a reason cross. He added meaning. Speaker added meaning to the choice that was made. Because in reality, there's nothing different between the two paths, right? But at the end of the day, the speaker still had to choose. The speaker understood that a path had to be taken regardless, right? And if there's no external force that drives what road to go down, the only thing that you could do is to make one and be content with it. Make up a reason to go and be okay with that, right? And so we see that here in this last stanza, right? The speaker has this feeling of resignation, right? The speaker understands that this isn't necessarily black and white. It's just a bunch of gray because they're both the same. But I have to make a decision, so I'm just gonna pick one and be done with it, right? The speaker resigns his feelings of regret, resigns his uncertainty about which path to choose, and chooses one. Chooses one because of the belief that he adds to it, because of the meaning that the speaker adds to it, right? And that is because it is the one that uh, is less traveled by, right? So the difference isn't that the two paths are different. The difference is the reasoning that the speaker gives to go down the path. Because if nobody's is giving giving the speaker a why to cross to go down one path, then the speaker has to make one for themselves, right? And so, yeah, that is an example of what it means to do somewhat of a literary analysis using the text, paying attention to keywords, and using examples from the text to support claims that are being made towards the meaning of the text. So I hope you guys learned something today. My name is Daniel, and this is PB Prep. Thank you for watching.